Imagine this. You wake up one morning and nothing has gone wrong, yet everything feels different. The room looks the same. The sky outside holds no omen. The people in your life haven't changed, but something inside you has shifted. You can't explain it, not clearly. It's not sadness. It's not fear. It's something harder to name. A weight behind the eyes. A quiet ache behind the ribs. A strange silence where certainty used to live. And for some reason, the things that used to excite you now feel empty. The routines that gave you comfort now feel like a performance. The laughter around you feels distant, like it's happening in another room. You try to shake it off, blame it on tiredness, boredom, a seasonal mood. But deep down, something is ending. And yet, strangely, you're not afraid. There's a flicker beneath the discomfort, a pulse, a whisper. Like your soul is standing at a door you can't see yet, waiting for you to notice. Carl Jung would have said this is no accident. He would have called it a signal from the self, the deeper, eternal part of you that's not interested in your comfort, but in your wholeness. And it only ever speaks clearly when something false is ready to fall away. That uneasy feeling in your chest, that's not depression. That sudden distance between you and your old world, that's not detachment. That moment when everything around you feels strangely irrelevant, that's not a breakdown. That's a beginning. But here's the paradox. The one Jung devoted his life to unraveling. The best chapters of your life don't begin when everything is clear. They begin when everything is collapsing. Most people think awakening feels like clarity, like inspiration, like bliss. But Jung knew better. He knew that psychological growth almost always begins in disguise, as disillusionment, fatigue, doubt, loss, or quiet existential grief. He knew that before your soul evolves, your ego resists, and it will disguise that resistance as confusion. So what if that sense of being stuck, isn't failure, but a sign that the ground beneath your identity is shifting? What if that ache you feel isn't emptiness, but space being made for something new? What if the version of you that feels like it's fading needs to fade? Because here is what no one tells you. Growth doesn't feel like rising. It feels like unraveling. You're not just upgrading your habits. You're reshedding versions of yourself that were built to survive in a world you no longer belong to. The beliefs, the personas, the relationships that once fit like skin, but now feel like armor. One by one, they start to fall away. Not because you're broken, but because you're becoming. And still, you hesitate. Because change doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives as unease, as inner friction, as sudden questions that echo too loud to ignore. What am I doing here? Why does this no longer feel right? Who would I be if I stopped pretending? These questions don't come from your mind. They come from deeper down where the self waits. Jung called this inner calling the process of individuation, the sacred unfolding of your true nature. And like all sacred things, it does not come gently. It asks you to leave behind what is familiar, not because it is wrong, but because it is done. And you can feel it, can't you? The version of you that tolerated what was intolerable. The you that stayed quiet to keep the peace. The you that dimmed your voice, your dreams, your instincts. That version is growing tired. It's slipping. And something else, something raw, something ancient is beginning to rise beneath it. This is the threshold. This is the quiet edge before a breakthrough. Not everyone notices it. Fewer still cross it. But you feel it. That ache, that restlessness, that strange grief that doesn't belong to a specific loss, but to a self you're outgrowing. So don't dismiss it. Don't numb it. Don't rush to fix it. Don't to run back into the old skin just because the new one hasn't fully formed. Because Carl Jung taught us, the self does not shout. It waits. It waits until the old life begins to crack. And then it whispers. And if you listen closely enough, You just might hear the signs that everything is about to change. The strange thing about transformation is that it almost always begins with discomfort, not inspiration. What most people call confusion or emotional exhaustion is often the soul, quiet resistance to continuing a life that no longer fits. But because the world is obsessed with clarity and productivity, we learn early on to mistrust this discomfort. We call it laziness, a phase, a personal failure to stay positive. Carl Jung, however, offered a radically different view. He believed that these inner disturbances were not symptoms to be suppressed, but messages to be heard. They were not detours from your path, they were the path. Jung taught that true psychological growth, the process of individuation, cannot begin until your current identity becomes too small for the truth that wants to emerge through you. But what does that really mean? It means that your ego, the part of you that manages your image, seeks approval, builds goals, and tries to keep you together, was never built to guide your evolution. It was built to protect you. And while the ego plays a necessary role in society, it also becomes the greatest obstacle to inner transformation. It clings to familiarity. It fears ambiguity. It would rather suffer predictably than risk dissolving into something unknown. And yet, the self, the deeper intelligence within you, has no interest in your comfort. It is not loyal to the version of you that others admire. It is loyal only to wholeness. So what happens when these two forces collide? You begin to fracture. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, the cracks begin. The mask you've worn begins to itch. The applause you used to live for begins to sound hollow. The life you built based on who you thought you were begins to feel alien. And this is where many people panic, because we've been taught to equate losing control with falling apart. But from a Jungian perspective, what you're losing isn't your mind, it's your illusion. You're losing the self that was shaped by cultural pressure, trauma, people-pleasing, and internalized narratives that were never truly yours. Jung believed that most people suffer not because of who they are, but because of who they are pretending to be. And society rewards that pretending. From childhood, you were taught to perform, be polite, be liked, be useful, don't cry too loud, don't want too much, don't question what adults told you. Over time, the pressure to conform creates a persona, a public mask, designed to be acceptable. And the more approval you receive for this mask, the more convinced you become that this is who you really are. But deep inside, something remembers. Something older than your upbringing. Something beyond your role, your resume, your relationships. This is what Jung called the self, the totality of who you are, including all the parts you've silenced, rejected, or forgotten. The self doesn't speak in the language of logic or social norms. It speaks through dreams, symbols, longings, and inner tension. And when it's ready to emerge, it disrupts everything that isn't aligned with your truth. Philosophers like Nietzsche saw this coming. He wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." In other words, chaos is not the opposite of growth. It's part of it. And yet, we live in a culture terrified of chaos. A culture that diagnoses discomfort as disorder. A culture that medicates inner turbulence before asking why it's there. Jung's framework offers a dangerous idea by modern standards, that your pain might have purpose, that your confusion might be a signal, not a flaw, that the crumbling of your false self is a sacred initiation, not a crisis. But make no mistake, this path is not for the faint of heart, because the moment you begin listening to your inner self, you become a threat to everything you've built on inauthentic ground. You question the career you pursued. You question the friendships that revolve around your silence. You even question your own values and realize that some of them were never truly yours. And this brings us to the hidden problem behind it all. Most people would rather live a predictable lie than face the terrifying freedom of truth. Sartre called it bad faith, the refusal to be radically honest with oneself, because the consequences would shatter the comfort of the false self. Schopenhauer, in his bleak but brilliant way, pointed out that humans are driven more by blind will than by reason. We construct lives around convenience, not integrity. But Jung? He believed something deeper was possible. He believed that buried beneath all the layers beneath the persona, the projections, the programming, there was a center, an indestructible core that holds the blueprint of your wholeness. And when you begin to realign with that core, everything false must fall away. And that's what you're feeling now, isn't it? The collapse, the questions, the restlessness that won't let you sleep, the quiet realization that this, whatever this is, can't continue. And while you may not yet have a clear picture of what's coming, you can feel the old skin cracking. You can sense something approaching, something that demands your full presence, your full honesty, your full becoming. But before you can step into this new chapter, you must see clearly the cost of staying where you are, because what we don't face controls us, and what we avoid defines us, and what we fear losing often holds the key to everything we are about to gain. Now comes the question no one wants to ask. What happens if you ignore the call? We go there next. You tell yourself you'll wait, just a little longer. You'll wait for clarity, for the right moment, for confirmation from the outside world that yes, this is the time to change. You keep walking the same path, even as the ground beneath, it grows more unstable. You say the same words, repeat the same choices, force yourself to care about the same things, all while something inside you is quietly dying. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When you ignore the signs of transformation, life doesn't stop moving, you just start moving against it. Carl Jung warned that what you resist doesn't disappear, grows stronger. The ignored shadow becomes louder. The repressed truth becomes sharper. The false identity you maintain begins to decay, and still you cling to it like armor, because at least it's familiar. But familiarity is not peace. It's a slow erosion, a life lived half awake. And what begins as subtle discomfort evolves into something much darker. You start to feel numb in moments that should move you. You begin questioning your purpose in spaces you once called home. The joy that used to feel effortless now feels manufactured. Conversations become rehearsed. Your own voice sounds like someone else's. This is not just dissatisfaction. It's spiritual suffocation. And worse, it's contagious. The longer you stay disconnected from your true self, the more you attract environments, relationships, and roles that demand your continued inauthenticity. You begin to orbit around systems that thrive on your silence, your compliance, your performance. And these systems will praise you for being agreeable, for being balanced, for being so easy to be around. But deep down, you are not here to be agreeable. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to become. And the longer you delay that becoming, the heavier the consequences. Your body begins to speak through illness. Your mind begins to spiral in self-doubt. You stay up late scrolling, searching, numbing. You fear the silence, not because it is empty, but because you know that if you were to listen closely, you'd have to change everything. That is the cost of ignoring the call. Your life continues, but it no longer feels like yours. And here's the paradox: society sees this as success. You're functional. You show up. You produce. You don't question the system. You blend in. You avoid extremes. You're not falling apart, at least not in public. But Jung saw through this illusion. He saw the vast numbers of people who were outwardly fine, yet inwardly fractured, who had never dared to ask, "Is this who I am, or just who I was taught to be?" He wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And he was right, because the soul doesn't speak in the language of comfort. It speaks in the language of longing, of tension, of symbolic chaos. And when ignored, it doesn't disappear. It rebels. It rebels through apathy, through emotional reactivity, through unexplained anxiety, through dreams that haunt instead of inspire, through a life that no longer reflects your internal world. And still, you press on, because change feels like risk, like loss, like loneliness. But here's what no one tells you. There is a greater cost to staying the same than there ever will be in becoming real. When you ignore the call to a new chapter, you sentence yourself to repeating the old one on loop. The same dynamics, the same inner battles, the same quiet desperation. You might change jobs, but the pattern follows you. You might end relationships, but the emotional wound remains. You might move cities, chase dreams, make lists, but the ache persists. Because what needs to change is not out there. It's in here. It's the story you tell yourself about what you deserve. It's the identity you wear to be accepted. It's the belief that you must earn love by becoming less of who you are. This is the unseen trap, not failure, but success in a life that isn't aligned with your truth. So the question becomes urgent. How long will you keep choosing what no longer fits, just because you're afraid of what might come next? There is no neutral ground. The soul is always moving. If you don't follow its call, you will feel the friction. Not because you're wrong, but because you're resisting the next chapter of your own evolution. And that chapter? It doesn't begin with a vision board or a 5-year plan. It begins with a fracture, a breaking, a slow crumbling of the persona that once kept you safe and is now keeping you stuck. You are not being punished. You are being summoned. And the pain you feel isn't the end of something, it's the beginning. It's life preparing you. It is the psyche tearing down the walls of a house that can no longer hold the truth of who you re-becoming. So listen. Listen not just to the pain, but to the wisdom beneath it, to the pull, to the dreams that don't let you sleep, to the questions that won't be silenced, to the wildness beneath your surface that refuses to be domesticated. You are not broken. You are breaking open. And the next chapter, it's waiting. But only if you choose to answer. It doesn't begin with a dramatic leap. No fireworks, no bold declarations, no instant clarity. In fact, the beginning of your freedom is so subtle, you might almost miss it. It begins the moment you stop trying to fix the feeling. That quiet, persistent ache you've been avoiding, that strange emptiness that creeps into your routines, your relationships, your goals. It's not a problem to solve. It's a compass. And the moment you stop silencing it with distractions, rationalizations, or spiritual bypassing, you're no longer controlled by it. This is the first act of rebellion, to feel without flinching. Carl Jung taught that healing begins not in becoming better, but in becoming whole. Wholeness requires the integration of everything you were taught to deny, the sadness you swallowed to be strong, the rage you buried to be good, the desires you silenced to be loved. Real growth isn't about self-improvement. It's about self-confrontation. And self-confrontation is a radical act in a world addicted to comfort. Because when you stop playing along, people will notice. You'll stop laughing at the jokes that belittle you. You'll stop apologizing for having needs. You'll stop explaining your decisions to people committed to misunderstanding you. You'll stop saying yes just to avoid discomfort. And suddenly, your presence starts to shift the dynamic around you. You'll be told you've changed. You'll be accused of being cold, selfish, distant. But what they really saying is, you stopped obeying the version of you I relied on. Let them. Your rebellion is not about anger. It's not about rebellion for its own sake. It's about ending the performance. It's about choosing alignment over approval. This will cost you. It always does. You may lose relationships that were built on your silence. You may feel alone for a while. You may grieve identities you outgrow. But you will gain something far more sacred, yourself. And once that begins, there's no turning back. You begin to hear your own voice again. Not the voice layered in politeness and filters, but the real one. The ancient one. The voice that knows when something's off, even when you can't yet explain why. The voice that doesn't justify its boundaries. The voice that simply says no. Enough. This isn't me anymore. And maybe for the first time in your life, you listen. That's when you begin to move differently. You no longer seek validation in places that once made you feel small. You no longer beg for love, you discern it. You no longer try to fit in, you recognize where you belong. You begin creating rather than proving. You begin expressing rather than editing. You begin showing up not as a version, but as a force. And the world will shift in response. The people who needed you to stay small will drift away. The opportunities that once relied on your inauthenticity will dissolve. But the spaces that are meant for you, the ones that see you, will begin to open. And here's the most surprising part. It won't feel like victory. It will feel like peace. No spotlight, no loud applause. Just a deep, almost unfamiliar stillness. You'll sit in a room alone and feel completely intact. You'll say no to something you would have once begged for. You'll walk away without guilt. You'll speak a truth and feel your spine straighten instead of your stomach twist. Because now, you are living in alignment. And alignment is freedom, not the kind the world sells you. Not the superficial, do whatever you want kind, but the sacred kind, the freedom of not betraying yourself. This is the rebellion Jung pointed to, a conscious detachment from everything that isn't real. A refusal to obey internalized voices that aren't yours. A return to something primal, intuitive, and unedited. And the beautiful irony? The people who belong in your life will be drawn not to your performance, but to your presence. You won't have to chase or prove or please. You'll simply stand in your truth, and they'll meet you there. Because the more you honor your own becoming, the more your life becomes a mirror of your integrity. This is the moment the new chapter begins, not with answers, but with refusal. Refusal to stay asleep. Refusal to keep shrinking. Refusal to postpone your own unfolding. And from this refusal comes revelation. Because the truth is, the version of you you've been searching for has never been missing. She's just been waiting. Waiting for you to stop pretending. Waiting for you to stop delaying. Waiting for you to return. And now you have. But there's still one thing left. One realization deeper than rebellion, deeper than healing, deeper than even transformation. Because all of this, the ache, the awakening, the unraveling, has been pointing to a single truth. The kind of truth that shifts everything, even your memory of the past. We go there now. Because the final stage of your becoming is remembering what you've always known. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. The final realization doesn't shout. It doesn't demand your attention like the chaos that came before. It arrives quietly, so quietly, in fact, that it almost slips past you. It's the moment you stop waiting to feel ready. It's the moment you stop asking for signs. It's the moment you stop needing proof. Because suddenly, you just know. You know that everything that felt like an ending was preparation. You know that the loss wasn't punishment. It was pruning. You know that the silence wasn't absence. It was space. Space for something deeper to emerge. Something more you. And in that stillness, the truth crystallizes. The new chapter you've been longing for, isn't ahead of you. It's already begun. You are not stepping into it. You are it. You thought it would come with a shift in circumstances. You thought you'd feel different, clearer, stronger. But now you realize it was never about feeling ready. It was about returning to what never left. That part of you that always knew. The voice that always whispered. The essence you buried beneath obligation, roles, expectations. Carl Jung called this the self, not your ego, not your personality, not your trauma identity or social mask. The self, the vast, integrated wholeness at the center of your being. The self doesn't strive. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't perform. It is. And when you arrive here, when you truly recognize this inner anchor, you no longer need external confirmation that you are on the right path. You are the path. You become congruent, aligned, unshakable, not because you've mastered life, but because you've stopped resisting who you are. And here's the most paradoxical part. Nothing may look different on the outside. The job is the same. The relationships are still there. The city hasn't changed. But you have. The lens is different. The center has shifted. The mask has dissolved. Now you speak, not to impress, but to connect. You act, not to gain approval, but to express truth. You rest, not because you've earned it, but because rest is sacred. You begin to embody something the world cannot define, and therefore cannot control. And in this space, the questions that haunted you for so long begin to unravel. What if I fail? You understand now that failure is a language only the ego speaks. The self doesn't fail. It evolves. What if they leave me? You see now that anyone who demands your betrayal was never truly with you. What if I'm too much? You finally realize you were never too much. You were just in places that required you to be less. And now you no longer negotiate with your truth. You no longer shrink for comfort. You no longer carry what's not yours. You no longer dim your light for those who are not ready to see. Because now you remember, the signs were never outside of you. They were in the ache, in the breakdown, in the loneliness that taught you how to sit with yourself, in the grief that stripped away your false identity, in the stillness where you learned to hear your own voice again. And here you are, not fixed, not perfected, but home. This is the best stage of your life, not because everything is easy, but because nothing is hidden. You are no longer divided, no longer rehearsing, no longer seeking. You are living from the root, from the self, from that eternal, untouchable center that was always there, beneath the layers, behind the fear, beyond the noise. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now you understand. It was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering someone ancient, someone real, someone who didn't need permission to exist. You. So let the world think you've changed. Let them not recognize your voice anymore. Let the old life fade without ceremony. Because now you don't need anyone to understand your becoming. It is not a performance. It is not an event. It is a return. A return to the life you were meant to live. A return to the truth you were born to embody. A return to the self you thought you had lost, but was quietly waiting all along. And from this place, this quiet, fierce, unmistakable center one final truth emerges. The most powerful chapter of your life begins the moment you stop waiting for one. And that moment is now. If this spoke to your soul, hit like and subscribe. Your transformation is just getting started.